Hi, everyone. Welcome to our class here on Navigating Parenting. Thank you so much for taking time to invest in yourself, in your parenting, in your connection with your children. Today, we are going to talk about patternings. We all have patterns that are ingrained within us. They become the place that we go to, the place where we react from within ourselves when we're triggered. What does it mean to be triggered? You know, in those moments when your child does something, or your partner says something, or something happens around you and you feel suddenly lots of big emotions coming up, and you lose complete control over how you're going to react in that moment to those big feelings that are coming up and to the person who's triggering, literally pulling the trigger, so that you perceive that they're causing these big feelings, right? That's what triggers are. When someone around us does something that pulls the trigger on a big feeling inside of us. Here's the thing though, we view it as them pulling the trigger, but they're not thinking about pulling the trigger. They're just doing or saying something that's pulling the trigger on a big emotion within us, but it exists within us. Those big emotions, those big feelings come from patternings within us. We all have our go-to reactions, our go-to words, our go-to way that we communicate when we're upset or uncomfortable in a situation. Many, if not all, of those big reactions that we have where we don't really feel control over ourselves, or it's like we see ourselves from an outsider's perspective, right? Have you ever been in that moment where you're like watching yourself do something and you want to stop, but you just can't? And like, it's like you're watching something from outside of yourself because you've completely lost control over your reaction, over your emotion, over your words and what you say. It's because there's a pattern that exists there. We all have these default patterns that we fall into. Now, there are so many different ways of changing those patterns, but first we have to understand where they're coming from. And I hope that in understanding where they're coming from, it will already be a support to you in beginning to change the way that you handle that, the way that you react when you're in one of those really challenging and triggering moments with your children. So where do default patterns come from? They really come from two different places. One is default patterns come from generational patterns, okay? Which means literally from the generations that came before us. Generational patterns come from the emotion and the way that our parents reacted and handled situations and challenges in their lives, which we observed and internalized consciously and unconsciously. Generational patterns mean that those patterns and emotions are actually passed down through bloodlines, which is why certain cultures have reputations for certain sorts of ways that they handle emotions or big reactions, right? Certain parts of the country are known for being more hot-blooded, or certain parts of the world, known for being more hot-blooded, right? Or drier, because those personality traits are literally passed down through our ancestors in our bloodlines, and through, of course, the social emotional that we are exposed to as children and as adults and as we go through life. Those generational patterns are locked so deeply into us. Why? Because from the ages of 0 to 7, a child's brain is developing rapidly. And what happens is neural pathways are forming. When children see how adults in their lives react to certain situations, that reaction, the way of handling that challenge, becomes the normal way that the child learns that they should handle that challenge, or the way to speak to someone, the way to engage, the way to communicate. which is why, right, even so many of us are conscious of the way that our parents might have parented and want to be different. We still find ourselves speaking like our mom or dad, or handling a challenge and like, oh my gosh, like I promised myself I wouldn't do that, and here I am doing it. And I feel like I have so little control over it. It's because those patterns are trapped literally in our bodies. And so they're expressed, of course, through our emotions and the way that we then go on to handle the different challenges and situations that come up in our lives. So I imagine that you have lots of light bulbs going off in your head. What do we do with this information, right? It's there. The first thing we do is we say, it stops with me. It stops with me. This pattern stops with me. By making the conscious choice to say this pattern is stopping with me, we're already taking a really big step in the right direction, right? By understanding that I don't have to be the way that I know, the way that I was taught. I can be different. And noticing, even if we're not able to notice it in the moment when we're reacting, but if you're able to notice it so that, afterwards, so that you can create this intention to change it, you're already making a difference in these generational patterns that have continued for so long. You're choosing to be the generation that stops it. Now, our default patterns also come from different experiences that we had as children that we didn't learn how to deal with or go through. Experiences as children or teenagers or even as adults, challenges that we faced, times when our feelings were hurt and we had big emotions, big feelings, or needs that weren't being met, limiting beliefs about ourselves that were driven home because of things that happened, trauma that was created that we didn't know how to deal with. And so what happens is we carry that with us and we don't know how to, and then we get triggered, and all of that is like layered inside of ourselves that we didn't deal with, we didn't clean out. So then our child triggers us and we fall into a pattern. We fall into a pattern of handling things because it's easier to just, deal with it right now in the short term. It's easier to just get my child to be quiet, right? We fall into these patterns. They become our comfort zone. They become what is comfortable for us, even though we know that it's not serving our highest self, right? It's not really bringing out and empowering us in our parenting. It's happening where it's what we've been able to come up with, and we become locked in these patterns. So our default patterns come from different places. What's most important, it's important to understand where they're coming from, because we can then understand that as human beings, we have this incredible power, this incredible ability to stand up and say, I'm going to change it. I don't have to keep falling into yelling. I don't have to keep falling into threatening and bribing or punishing my children in ways that don't feel good, but I just feel like I don't have another choice. We always have a choice. And how empowering and how beautiful is it to know that you don't have to stay locked in these patterns. These patterns don't define who you are. These patterns don't have to be your norm. You are strong enough to break all of them, but we all need support. So this is why it's important to know that these patterns exist, to know there's nothing wrong with you that you yell or scream or behave, parent without boundaries, and you're not able to enforce healthy boundaries or create them or hold them, right? Or you're not able to really have empathy for your child, or your child's in a place where you feel like you're not communicating with each other. This all can change. So now that we understand what default patterns are and where they're coming from, let's talk about the different patterns that exist, okay? Or some of them, perhaps you'll be able to share with me some that I missed. But let's talk about parenting from a place of wanting to be in power over our children, and versus parenting from a place where we are feeling empowered and we want to empower our child, right? There's an example that I gave to a client yesterday. The client was struggling with this need to have power over their child, right? I was asking, like, why do you need to be the one to have power? Why do you need to be the one to have the last word? And it was an interesting question. I don't think she had an answer for it right in that moment, right? Probably it came from a belief that she had where parents always have to be the one who is in power, right? Because then what will the child think if they think they're in power? But the example I gave her was like when you show up to when they're like, or if you're watching in the movies, right? Or if you're about to get in a fist fight, who's the bigger person? The one that throws the last or first or last punch, or the one who walks away empowered because they don't need to prove themselves to anyone? As parents, many times we get stuck in this fist fight. We think that we need to be the ones to show our power, but actually the power comes from walking away. And this is the difference from parenting from a place of needing to feel a power over and parenting from a place of being empowered. When we feel like we need to be in power over, what happens is a power struggle ensues, and we will never have a true connection, true communication, respectful connection and communication with our child. But if we can understand that to actually be the bigger parent who's winning, we want to empower ourselves. Then we can create and build this communicative, connected relationship with our children. So let's talk about, what does it look like to parent from a place of power, and what does it look like to parent from a place of empowerment? Parenting from a place of power is, I feel like I need to be dominant and I need to be the one who's in control, right? So we're interested in controlling or stopping our child's behavior, right? What is that? How does that manifest? What does that look like? We put conditions for love and attention and affection, right? Even if it's not like we're not explicitly saying I'll only love you if you did this, but when our child isn't behaving the way we want them to, we give them the cold shoulder, or we make faces at them, right? Or we offer them that love and attention and affection when they're behaving the way that we want them to, not just when they're behaving and by them just being, right? Another way that we can exert this parenting from a place of power is when there's no room for discussion and there's no questions asked. You do as I say because I'm the parent and I know best, right? Whatever I say goes. So the parent always has to win. Parenting from a place of power also looks like respect from fear, right? You do what I say because if you don't, I will show you why you should be. And then there's also manipulative and confusing communication, right? Parenting from a place of bribes, manipulations, punishments, threats, rewards, shame, or guilt, right? How can I get my child to do what I want them to when I want them to? That's parenting from a place of wanting to just gain power. We might get some short-term results. Later on, they won't work. Trust me. And then there's parenting from a place of empowering ourselves and empowering our children, right? And that looks like having a relationship with our kids, which is ultimately, I know, what we all want. It's just a matter of, how do we get there, right? How do we get there? So we have unconditional love for each other, right? Your needs deserve to be met no matter what. You deserve love and attention and affection no matter how you're behaving, right? I'm not going to tell you what to do. We're going to have discussion and I'm going to ask questions and I'm not going to judge you and I'm going to stay curious and open, right? And I want to understand how you're feeling and where you are and what you're going through. There's natural earned respect, where a parent shows a child that they respect the child, where the child feels safe and heard and loved, and so they naturally just want to show respect back to the parent. Direct communication, right? I'm going to be very clear about what I need and what I'm feeling and about my intentions and what our family values are, right? I don't need to force you or coerce you or manipulate you. right? Because all of this depletes my energy and it depletes your energy. An empowered relationship looks like one where everyone has a voice. Nobody feels like they have to win. There's never winners and there's never losers. Everyone is figuring out how to communicate and connect with each other. Now, it won't always look like that with children because they're learning. But as parents, if we're in the place of that's our biggest intention, is to create a space where our children feel like we're communicating with them. We're looking to connect with them. We're parenting from a place of creating patterns that are loving, that are connected. How do we go from this place of living within our default pattern, falling into the manipulations and the love, the conditional love, which of course I know every parent always loves their child, but those moments where we're not showing unconditional love because we're taking something away when our child's upset, or we're turning away from them in a moment when they need it, or we're talking about them badly behind their back because because we really do think they're so difficult, right? We fall into yelling, we fall into just trying to regain control over our child rather than allowing them their space for their voice and to be who they are and to just accept them for who they are, with and without the behavior that we'd like to see. How do we move ourselves from the default pattern into, creating a different pattern for ourselves, an empowered pattern? It's not something, I want to preface this by saying, it's not something that happens overnight necessarily. It totally could. Some of it might take a little bit of stronger work, because what's going to happen is you're going to see that certain default patterns are embedded so deeply within you that they're really hard to A, notice, and then B, break. They're really hard to change. If we were yelled at as a child a lot, then that yelling, we might not be able to lower our voice. The yell might come out before we even realize it's happening. It's all about then, what do we do in that moment? When we notice it's happening, we stop and we take time to go internally. We take time to reflect on it. Why am I yelling? The question to ask myself is, why am I yelling? Do I think my children are going to hear me better when I'm yelling because my voice is raised? Is it because I feel unheard, and if I raise my voice, they will hear me more? Perhaps, right? Was yelling the way that I got attention as a child, when I was like, my parents only listened when I finally yelled at them. So now when my children aren't listening, I feel like I need to raise my voice in order to be heard, because then they'll listen to me. Maybe my kids do listen to me when I yell. That's even proves my point, right? I should be yelling, but does it feel good? How do they listen to you? Are they listening because they're afraid, because you startled and scared them? Or are they listening because they're really respecting you in that moment? Do you like yelling? How does it feel? Right? These are all questions we can ask ourselves about whatever our default pattern is, whatever pattern we fall into when our child is triggering us. We want to go deep and understand. And sometimes we can't do that in the moment. We can't do that in the moment because the kids are, splashing around in the bath and we can't take that time to go inside, or we're in the middle of making dinner. There's like so many difficult, challenging things that are happening in that moment, and we can't like get a grasp on it, right? That's okay. We go back to it when we can. We write it down so we don't forget to go back to it. And then we explore it. And we stay open, and we stay curious, and we stay non-judgmental of ourselves. Because in order to be able to come from a place of not yelling at our children, we have to stop yelling at ourselves too. Oftentimes, when we're trying to manipulate, punish, reward, control our child, or we don't offer unconditional love, it's because we don't have it for ourselves. Are we spending a lot of time punishing ourselves? Are you spending a lot of time yelling at yourself? Are you spending a lot of time not nurturing yourself? Questions to ask, right? Important questions to ask yourself. This is how we start to break out of those patterns. This is how we start. And there will be some patterns that you can break on your own, and there will be some patterns you're going to need some more support with. And so I urge you to reach out to me, or reach out to another person in your life who you feel can support you to break free, to break loose of these challenges. of these patterns, of these triggers. And when you're noticing your triggers, notice where else in your life do those triggers come up? Or when else in your life have you felt this way? Is it with everything? Is it really, if it's with everything, you know it's not about your kids, right? Is it with your kids and your spouse, or your partner, or your ex-partner? Did you remember feeling this as a child? Where is it coming from? This is the internal digging that you want to do. What are you trying to accomplish by it? And how else can you accomplish it? If you want your kids to hear you, don't feel heard, and you don't want to yell, how can you get your kids to hear you without yelling? What can you do? What can you do differently? It starts with what can you first believe about yourself that's different? Do you believe that you're worthy of being heard? Do you believe that what you have to say is important? Do you think your children should listen to you? Or is there a part of you that's like, I don't know what I'm doing. Why should my kids listen to me? Patterns run our lives if we let them. We don't want to let patterns run our lives. We want to break free of them because we are in control and we are empowered, and that's our choice. Thank you so much for being here and for joining us for this class. I'd love to hear what questions you have and what topics you'd like me to cover. Please, please, please share them with me. And I wish you a wonderful rest of your day or evening, wherever you are in this moment, to feel good and at peace and strong and empowered.